everyone. Welcome to week 8 of the STC Invited Talk. This is the third one of the quarter, and I'm very excited to introduce one of my colleagues, Josh Howell, a sales engineering manager working for PNW at Rubrics, and he is going to give us a talk on the new business Calisthenics. And Josh has more than 25 years of working experience in IT. And he has been, if I remember correctly, he has a Bachelor of Science in computer science. And also he has been an extraordinary communicator, and he has been one of my favorite guest speakers when I was teaching at the previous institution. So, Josh, would you like to take the floor?
Sure. So just a couple things really quick. Can you guys all see my screen? Should be a man in a blue shirt doing some exercises. Okay. I'm less familiar with Microsoft Teams, so bear with me, and you guys can all see me, I hope, and we'll go from there. So Dr. Meng, thank you so much for having me. I always enjoy the opportunity to get together and talk about things that are interesting. And I have to say that when I was at PLU, what I most enjoyed about the experience was the pleasure of getting together with other adults who wanted to learn and getting to discuss new ideas and topics. And I always went home in a very good mood after my classes, even though they were late at night. So what I want to talk about today is some bold claims. So this is, as I think of it, the intersection of business and technology. And I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to say that for the foreseeable future, efficiency is overrated. Fat and waste aren't necessarily bad. And there are a lot of business leaders who are over in the corner kind of self-soothing and don't want to understand the challenges they are up against. So I know a lot of that won't make a lot of sense yet and might be a little controversial, but bear with me and maybe it will start to make sense. So first, a little bit about me. I've done a little bit of everything. I've been working in IT since I was 15. I've managed IT at various companies. I've managed engineers at a bunch of others. I've worked for big banks like Washington Mutual. I've worked for companies that did services for IT organizations. I've worked a lot on this side of the fence where we're selling technology. And as part of that, I get to meet with a lot of companies. So I've literally probably met with 1,000 different companies across the Northwest over the last 15 years. And I've got to see a microcosm of what every organization is doing around IT, how they approach it, how they struggle with it, and the sorts of business challenges that they're trying to solve. So it's not to say I'm a be-all, end-all expert on everything, but I have gotten to have a lot of really unique experiences, and I hope some of those can be useful to you. So I'm going to start off with one of my favorite things, and that's history. And I think, by the way, I've requested that the Victorian age give us imagery with better resolution. I understand that's very fuzzy. We're still working on it, but if you were to go back in time, and if you were standing on this street corner watching this scene at a Victorian era market, you would probably hear certain things. You would hear people saying, we have this product. You might hear them yelling out prices. You might hear them trying to get people's attention as they walk by. And really what they're doing is something that hasn't been changed for thousands of years. It was as true probably 2000 BCE until just maybe 20 some odd years ago. And it's this intersection of 4 fundamental questions that underpin every business model. In my mind, if you are a business owner or you work at a company, your company has figured out this intersection of 4 things: understanding what the market is and where it is, understanding what customers want in terms of product preferences and price points, how to communicate to them that you have the thing that they want, and then how to engage with them, how to communicate, transact, etc. And all of these have levels of communication and data associated with them. But for most of our lives, and for certainly all of the lives that most of our senior business leaders, think your VPs, CEOs, et cetera, for most of our lives, all of our business models look something like what is on your screen now. They spray advertising out there. They hope some people see it, that some of those people might actually visit their store. They will make some sort of offer. You give them money, they give you physical goods, and any data that's collected is an after product. We eliminate it because it really wasn't of any use, right? Think about that receipt. That's really the end of it, and they're done. And what I want to say is that all four of these fundamental questions are being not just changed, but radically upended by technology. And none of this is particularly new. Everyone has their favorite story about how, Netflix doesn't own bricks and mortar locations or sell videotapes, and Uber doesn't own taxi cabs, and Airbnb doesn't own hotels. And I've always been puzzled with those stories because it's not as though not owning something is a way to make money. That's not the secret of their success. But in every one of these cases, they learned how to do something that other organizations couldn't. So in the case of understanding what customers want, big data is changing how we understand customers. It used to be you would have to hope that males between the ages of 20 and 45 might find your product interesting. You could target people with that specificity. Today, we can figure out who Dr. Meng is at a personal level, what his interests are, what he's looking at, where he's at in the purchasing cycle, where he lives, and we can target him as an individual. And this opens up radical new opportunities for how we communicate with customers through digital marketing. If you haven't ever tweeted at an airline while in an airport, you should sometime. And you may find that people are responding to you, that they won't respond to you if you're not in an airport. Digital marketing, when done correctly today, has the ability to have a two-way, ongoing conversation, a dialogue with consumers that was previously impossible. Now, how do we engage with people? Today, primarily that's mobile and social. There are other aspects. I think of web almost as a equal player, or maybe even as a subcategory of your mobile presence, just because mobile has become so dominant. And the way people interact with brands is often through social media. So when we have our phones, we have our devices, these aren't just ways that people consume information, but they're also fulfillment frameworks. You can buy an app made by someone in India. You can pay for things through an app store. There is now an entire engagement ecosystem around mobile and social. And lastly, understanding the market. Sensor data is helping us understand the world in ways that were never possible before. We may have devices that know more about us than we consciously know about ourselves. Google, for instance, knows where I ordered takeout last night because it popped up and asked, "Are you at this restaurant?" Which I found mildly creepy, but sensor data is an amazing, rich source of understanding the business world around us if we know where to look and how to interpret it. And so this is what is creating entirely new business models, modern business models, where, yes, money is changing hands, but as much as money, the currency in these modern business models is data. And you can see how in this business model, I may have seen something on Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, what have you. I thought it looked interesting. I downloaded their mobile app. They gave me a free subscription. I fed them data about the most intimate corners of my life, which may or may not be a good decision. And in return, they harvested enough data from me and sold it to a third-party provider that they were able to use that money probably to pay an independent contractor, think your Uber driver or somebody like that, who actually did something useful for you in the real world. This is a much more modern business model. And when you look at this, everything in it is data, information, APIs, trust, and to some degree anonymity. And this is a much more complicated software mediated way of doing business. Everything about this is dependent on technology. And so I'm going to propose a definition. There are many, but I think most people, when they say digital business, what they mean is I upgraded my interface to be HTML5 or some whatever the new thing is. I put a mobile app in front of my existing business model, and I think that's completely wrong. I think digital business is a digitally native business model that is built to leverage what is now possible through modern technology for data and software. So a lot of organizations out there still have the same business model. They've just put a wrapper in front of it, and to them, that's digital business. I fundamentally disagree. And let's talk about a couple examples. So Mercedes-Benz, they make money by selling ridiculously priced automobiles, and they realized in the near future, we may have a city of 100,000 people that is served by 5,000 shared automobiles. The number of automobiles we actually need when you have fully self-driving cars that can be summoned on demand and sent away when they're no longer needed is a small fraction of what the total number of cars used to be. And so they're looking at how do we make money when we don't have two automobiles parked in every driveway anymore. And so Daimler-Benz is one of the organizations who really funded the Car2Go startup, because they were looking at how do we move from a one-time transaction to an ongoing subscription service that you pay for month in and month out, right? Similarly, John Deere, if I asked you what a farmer really wants, John Deere in decades past might have said, well, they want really good farm equipment. And what John Deere realized from talking with their customers is that the farm equipment is just an input. What the farmer really wants at the end of the day isn't necessarily a plowed field. It isn't healthy crops. It's money into the bank more reliably. And so John Deere recognized that there was value to be added above and beyond the equipment in terms of how do you farm effectively. So they sell equipment today that can pay attention to moisture levels in the field, to crop yields when it's harvesting. They can overlay that with satellite data from NOAA weather satellites and other things. They can actually see moisture in the field up to a meter deep, and they can create a 2D map of what the field needs. And instead of spending a lot of money to spray a blanket level of chemicals over the field, they can vary that and say this part needs more potash, this part needs more nitrogen, this part over here needs more of this other thing. And now they can send you that file. You download it from John Deere, you put it into your piece of equipment, and the equipment auto-modulates what you treat your field with. And John Deere was finding that when they used their software to the fullest, for instance, they can even vary the density with which they plant seeds in the field and the depth to which they place the seed on demand based on the soil types in the field. That yield in some of these fields was going up by 40%, 40% over what the farmer was getting the year prior. And they went further and said, in fact, if you use our methods, John Deere can indemnify the farmer against crop loss and guarantee them a certain crop yield. So John Deere found a way to move from selling a widget to selling an outcome. And in doing so, got much closer to what the farmer actually cared about, right? I just want to check in because I can't actually see anybody. Are you guys still all able to hear me, and are we following so far?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, excellent. So I'm going to keep going because I want to get to the end when we can talk about questions. So there are startups that pay attention to the social feed happening in a physical location. You give them an address. This Venue Labs was a Seattle company that got bought recently by, I want to say it was SAP. And they can, if you give them an address, they'll tell you what's being said on social media inside those four walls. This staff person is great. The bathrooms are dirty. This deal is fantastic. In fact, some of their customers gave them the street addresses of their competitors so they could hear what was being said inside their competitor's location. Some organizations are traditional retail. You go in, it's still a bricks and mortar store, but you are being tracked by your device's IMEI number as you move through the store, and they marry that up with your credit card when you go through the cash register, and they can see, wow, you spent a lot of time in this part of the store, but you actually bought nothing from that, right? What's going wrong over there? And so being able to better understand the consumer is one of the things we can do with technology. Moving from B2B to C, straight to the consumer, so a B2C model. There are labs that used to offer their services through hospitals or third-party locations that are now figuring out we can actually just send you a kit. If you're someone who needs labs regularly, you take the lab, you send it right back, we'll give you your results through a mobile app, and you can choose who you share it with. So they're moving much closer to the end consumer. And the reality of this is that this has been going on for a long time and isn't going to stop anytime soon. We are now in the 5th, 6th, 7th wave, what have you, of how technology is changing business. There's a really good book called Vaporized. It's the book that I wish I had written. But he makes the case that literally every single industry will go through this disintermediation, this democratization, where technology frees us from the constraints that used to dictate what was a viable business model, right? Now, so far, I haven't said anything that should be too earth-shattering. You probably should have heard all of this before, right? What I want to shift into is why I called this a talk about calisthenics. So calisthenics is a word that really just means exercises, but it's disambiguated. It's the physical exercises we do to improve our bodies or stay strong. And the reason I think it's interesting to think in this way is I used to lead an IT shop, and IT infrastructure was one of my responsibilities. And when I went to the leaders of the company and said, we have this massive risk, if something happened to our primary data center, we would cease to exist as a company. Nothing would happen anymore. And there was this old grizzled chairman of the board who would oftentimes hold up a pencil and he would growl something about how he had started this company with this pencil, and you could still run this company with this pencil. And it was difficult for me to know whether that was posturing because they didn't want to spend the money or he actually believed that. Because the reality of it is, if you can't answer a telephone, if you can't take a booking via a website, if you can't answer an email, if you can't chat with people on your website, if you can't accept EDI, if your ERP system is offline, you essentially have ceased to exist as a company. And just ask any one of the many, many organizations that today I work for Rubrik. We work around data security and resiliency. We help 2 to 3 customers a week who are getting hit by ransomware. And it does not feel to those customers as though they can run their business with a pencil. They have essentially vanished off the internet. Their employees are sitting around looking at dark screens. And in many cases, they simply cannot do business without technology. So when I say that the business world is going to see a tidal wave of companies that are destroyed by technology, what I specifically mean is that there is this deluge coming that business leaders are responding to in a variety of ways. Some are out experimenting and figuring out what that looks like. Some are taking a wait and see approach, which is roughly as effective as doing nothing. And some of them are actively denying that anything is happening. It was just a few years ago, I remember the president of NBC said, we think people will come back to watching TV in the evenings the way they were always meant to. In response to, are they going to create their own streaming service? He said, they'll come back to watching it the way they were always meant to. And I just thought, boy, in the post-Netflix age, it really takes willful ignorance to say such a thing. But that is the reality of a lot of our business leaders, is they don't have the energy to learn the new things. They're not willing to invest the time to learn about technology. And so there is a tidal wave coming with their company's name on it. And I'm going to throw out another possible definition, and that's digital transformation. I think the book, The Lean Startup, if you are going to work in technology, if you're going to be in business in this era, if you're going to do anything with a startup, a product, anything like that, I think this is the single best book out there. And it talks about how to create a sustainable business model in a data-driven way that is free of ego and vanity metrics, but relies on experimentation and customer feedback. And I really believe that that is the most important thing people can be learning today as a skill set if you're going to work in technology. Okay, I'm going to pause here just because usually I can read people's faces, I can see the crowd engagement. So I just want to do a quick check-in. Any questions over anything I've said so far?
I don't have a question per se, and I'm hoping that we can, when we get into really discourse about this, talk about the impact technology is having on government, on education, um, and our basic society.
I used to consider myself, I'm so glad you brought that up. I used to consider myself a very optimistic technologist, that progress was inevitable, technology freed us from thankless work. And to be honest, it's gotten to the point where today I'm a bit of a Grinch because we're not doing anything about worker retraining. We're not considering how many jobs we destroy that used to pay a living wage that now there really isn't a replacement for. I think it's not a valid response, but I've refused for a while to use the automated checkout lines just because, like, there is no replacement job for this person. And it's great that that company makes a bit more money, but where does that leave us as a society at large? So yes, let's talk about government and technology and society in a little bit, but I'm going to race through a little bit more content and then let's talk. So I want to talk about innovation and I want to introduce some concepts. And let's talk about obstacles to innovation first. One of them is Conway's Law. So Conway's Law, essentially, in its most simple form, says if you take three university students and you give them a group project, they will produce an end result that is really three parts glued together, okay? And we intuitively all know this from our group assignments, but it's true at companies and product levels also. If you have three teams, the eventual architecture of the system will reflect the management and organizational communication patterns. So if everything flows to me as a manager, I answer to a VP, and he communicates to that other team, our product will necessarily be constrained by a similar architecture. And that's interesting. But what I would also say is that the inverse is true, that organizations then optimize to produce their existing product. And if you think about it, today our jobs, because we haven't done a good job of updating our governance, how we manage society, our jobs are how we get access to things like affordable healthcare through group insurance discounts. Our jobs are how we get access to retirement savings accounts. And when we put somebody out to pasture, when we lay them off from a job, we're really severing them from not just the ability to earn a living or maybe pay their mortgage, but also get their children health care or be able to provide for themselves when they get old. And as a natural result, because most of us, I believe at least good people, should be empathetic, should care about others around them, and we form relationships, it creates this organizational inertia where we are more motivated to keep people in jobs and avoid change than we are necessarily to do what's best for the consumer or take on new challenges. And if we as a society want to get better at innovation, one of the things we need to address are the downsides of making changes for employees, because otherwise we end up with this. And I wish we were all in person because we could have a good chuckle. It's not that I'm anti-Microsoft necessarily, although I'm not much of a fan of many of their products, but it's because they best exemplify what I'm talking about, where if you give Microsoft a new market opportunity, what they will attack it with is a mashup of 4 or 5, or to their mind, hopefully all of their products to address that need. And if you work for Microsoft, I apologize. I swear I'm not trying to call you guys out necessarily. This is all big companies. This is HPE. This is Dell. This is all of them. Because internally, it's a turf war, right? I need to keep my people employed. I want to protect my headcount. What does this new business change mean for my department? Are you going to cannibalize my fiefdom? Why did you create that new startup out there instead of having it answer to me? I own customer engagement. And so we get this turf war that's very inefficient for innovation. The next challenge to innovation, I mean, there are so many, we can't even scratch the surface, but one of them is how we measure innovation, right? We as a society are very focused around efficiency. We think in terms of ROI. And the problem is that at its outset, no invention will ever be as good as our existing business model, right? Even because of our own bias, even if it is, we probably won't recognize it or admit it because that's not how we make money today, right? We have a hammer, everything needs to look like a nail, or why are we here? That picture on the lower right was the first digital camera ever invented by an engineer at a company called Kodak. And the bigwigs at Kodak looked at it and said, are you kidding? No one will ever buy this thing. The resolution is terrible. This is a child's toy. Put that away and let's go back to making film. And we all know how that one turned out, right? And it isn't that these people were stupid. It's that they had a responsibility to do what? What is the thing that we all say business leaders have a responsibility towards? The shareholder. We think and we talk in terms of maximizing shareholder value, and we report our earnings to the street quarterly, and we incentivize executives sometimes on not spending money, right? Or on meeting the existing market, and we think in terms of existing customers and metrics, and as a result, where is the incentive to innovate? This is a massive problem for long-term stability and thinking within companies when we are incentivizing quarterly results and quarterly thinking and getting this month or this year's bonus so that we can move on to some company and optimize our bonus structures there. So I want to shift a little bit to talking about optimization. Like, what is optimizing? And I'm going to throw out a definition because it gets to something that I want to talk about here, the new business calisthenics. Optimizing is finding the ultimate answer in light of a certain playing field or set of constraints or environment, right? Now, in this case, the optimization they found was a minimum. It was the deepest or lowest point on that contour. But what if that is constantly changing? Can you find the optimal answer if the playing field is shifting under your feet all of the time? And if you've ever watched footage of people responding to an earthquake, the answer is no, you can't find optimal. What you're trying to do is just keep your balance, right? You're trying not to run into things or have things fall on you. And so I think our society will often tend to think that this is the fittest person, that this person, this mindset of lean and efficient and hungry and super optimized is in fact the ultimate. And I used to be part of an elite military organization. I was actually this unit, the Ranger Regiment. And what I would tell you is that the people who are most responsible for going out there and really enduring horrible conditions and surviving really terrible, because that's the Ranger Regiment's mission, is doing the things that are too miserable for everyone else. You don't see a lot of those physiques. And why is that? Well, the reason is because they don't have time to go to the gym twice or three times every day. They're not eating really engineered meals. Most of the time they're eating out of an airport vending machine on the go, or they're skipping meals, and when they do get to eat, they're trying to cram as many fatty calories into their bodies as possible, because goodness knows when you're going to get another meal like this one, right? And so what you end up with is somebody who's got a little bit of a tummy because the body fat is useful. It's not wasted. That's not suboptimal. It's optimized for survival, right? And to continue with the military analogy a little further, although I'm a huge critic of military leadership in general, and every time I see a book about business lessons from the military, I roll my eyes because please, let's not have more of that in the business world or the civilian world. But I do think General McChrystal made a valid point. It's a decent book, and he talks about how efficiency is necessary, but it's no longer sufficient to be a successful organization. The goal has to shift. I need to fix my typo there. Has to shift from efficiency to sustained organizational adaptability. And that's really where I come back to. The business world is changing fast. And so I want to revisit this Blockbuster versus Netflix story, because I don't think it's the story most people think it is. When most people tell this story, they say Blockbuster was dumb, they had a business model, they clung to it, Netflix came along, blindsided them, and Blockbuster was gone. Why didn't Blockbuster see that the future was streaming video? And it's actually a bit more nuanced than that, because in fact, Netflix tried to sell itself to Blockbuster, not once, not twice, but on 3 separate occasions. I believe Blockbuster declined to buy Netflix. The first time, I think, was for $50 million. For $50 million, Blockbuster could have owned Netflix. Now, The fact that they declined it the first time, I get. The second and third times is a little harder to rationalize. But what's interesting is that Blockbuster actually did try and launch several different versions of a streaming service. Eventually, Dish ended up owning the Blockbuster brand, but Blockbuster did try and come up with and develop streaming services of their own and failed because innovation is hard. It takes time and effort. Technology is not easy. IT is a team sport, and it's a really tough one. By the way, fun footnote to this story is today Blockbuster is a very slick, really clean and elegant streaming service that a bunch of like crypto organizations bought, and it's a peer-to-peer sort of thing. I don't fully understand it, but we may actually have another chapter to the Blockbuster story. But the point I'm trying to make here is that velocity with software, innovation, the ability to bring out new features that customers care about is really difficult. It is a truism in the software industry that something like 2/3 or 3/5, let's say 3/5 of all software features go unused, never adopted by the customer. And if you put that in real world terms, it means every software developer could be having 5-day weekends, and we would still get the same use or throughput from them if only we could tell what things were going to be used by the customer and which ones weren't. And part of the problem is that it takes so long to develop software features. There is so much that you need to know. These are all things that a developer would kind of know about and how they relate to each other. This is where I spent a number of years working with different organizations, helping them understand how developers want to think and work, and how literally everything in IT needs to change if you want to be one of these unicorns that can bring new software features to market multiple times a day. But it's difficult. And part of the reason that it's so difficult to create features that customers care about is because IT and software development is really hard. Everybody conceptually understands plan, do, check, act, or maybe you're more comfortable with the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, and act. That's what the military teaches. But in all of these, there's really two parts. And the two parts are one, that we need to learn to sense what's happening in the world around us. And the next part is that we need to learn to respond with software features that delight customers. So sensing is something that we're going to do through big data, through IoT, and responding is something that we're going to do with software features, with digital marketing, with engagement through mobile and social. And you can almost think of this as a boxing match. It's almost like a boxing match with your competitors. And if you can't sense, if you can't see what's happening around you, how long are you going to stay in this fight? If you can't respond in a meaningful way, how long can you dodge punches, even if you can see them coming? And I don't think it's any surprise that, given the nature of changes in the business world, the way technology is disintermediating everything, that 50% of the Fortune 500 have disappeared. Like, that should make sense at some level, because a lot of organizations are essentially swinging blind, or they're in paralysis mode and they're not even swinging. They are milking every bit of their existing business model that they can, hoping to get acquired before they stop being able to pay people, right? So this is where the lean startup methodology comes in. Is it makes this case that the only real meaningful way to develop a new product, a new offering, is through this virtuous cycle of having customer interactions that produce data. Did you like our thing? Did you prefer A or B, right? And taking that data, analyzing it, coming up with validated learning or conclusions that your market has agreed are true, and then using that to improve your customer interactions. And the key is that it's our speed, it's our ability to do this again and again and again repeatedly that produces sustained competitive differentiation. Every single other differentiation out there, whether it's regulatory stuff, if it's capital that's required, capital is cheap. Unfortunately, these days, regulators can be bought, campaign contributions. And so really the only sustained competitive advantage that is to be had is your ability to truly understand what your customers want, the exact size, color, shape, customizations, personalization, venue, etc., that they wish to interact and purchase your product with, and then getting it to them best, as fast, as cheapest, etc. And that ability to really understand and delight your customers should be and can now be a two-way conversation where they are speaking to your product management people who better optimize the product, and you develop fanatical customers. I collect tools for a hobby, and people spend ridiculous amounts of money on this ratchet or that screwdriver over these others just because those companies have figured out how to really meet people's inner desires for specifics of tools. So the new business exercises, the new business calisthenics, I think fall in a couple categories. One is all about learning to sense what's happening. And this is through real-time access to information and prescriptive analytics, not what happened, but also come up with theories that explain what will happen, right? To learn to respond or act on those insights. This is through excellence in software development, digital marketing, et cetera. And then removing barriers to innovation and agility within your organization, okay? And this is where I'm going back to the beginning and saying waste, fat, and efficiency are not the story that we think they are in business if we want to survive this change in the landscape. So what do these innovation exercises, or what do these exercises that I'm prescribing look like? I'll just give you a couple examples. Dr. Meng, I'll share this deck. You can make it available to people if you wish, so you can read it, but I don't mean it to be an eye chart. But for instance, how fast can you get feedback from customers and funnel that to product development? That is a measure of your ability to innovate. Whose ideas win? Is your company obsessed with hippos, the highest paid person's opinion? Is that what wins? There's a story about Amazon where somebody walked into Werner Vogel's office and said, I think we should show people other products they could add to their cart before they check out. And his mindset was, don't slow people down, don't make them reconsider. Once the product is in the cart, don't touch it. The engineer went out and did it anyway in an A/B style test because they could do that. Most companies still can't do that. And came back and showed him the data, and he said, I was wrong and you were right. And today, if you shop on Amazon, you'll see that thing. But in many companies, that would get you fired, not get your idea recognized. Knowing the consumer. What would it take, and what would your organization have to do in order to know when your customer walks up to your cash register, your sales floor employee, when you pick up the phone, when they type their name in a chat, that you know who they are, what they bought from you, what they make, where they live, what their interests are, who they're influenced by, and what sort of influence they have. Can you give your customer service representative that on a screen before the customer opens their mouth? It is already being done by some companies today. How well can you know your customer? Knowing yourself, right? Who are your best customer service people? Who has the highest or most complaints, right? Who has the highest customer satisfaction? Are you able to show your salespeople data about this customer satisfaction before they enter into negotiations? Are the disparate data sources being brought together to give you an overall picture of the customer? How mature is your ability within your own walls to do some of these things? How literate are your decision makers in regards to social media? Most of them aren't. Knowing the market. There's a story that's probably apocryphal, but in the hours after 9/11, Walmart knew that there was going to be an uptick on sale of American flags, right? Target didn't know it for weeks. By that time, Walmart had all of the capacity for American flags locked up under contract. If CNN runs an article about you, how fast could you detect the leading results of that, negative or positive, right? How fast will you know there's an uptick in demand for a certain product? Product exercises. How could you customize and dynamically tailor your product to a specific customer's tastes? What APIs are you exposing to the customer that they could integrate their own products with or other projects with, right? What do customers do before or after they use your product and service? Where do they go? Can you remove friction from that? In terms of software development, how long does it take a developer in your organization to get the raw materials they need? Virtual machines, containers, network ports, firewall changes, those sorts of things. There's just all sorts of things that you can do to assess, are we able to innovate, right? And all of these things can be done and can be addressed before the fat's in the fire, before your customers are angry and going somewhere else, before you see your revenue start to trend downwards. And this is what I mean by the new business calisthenics. I've always wanted to work at a company where it took high potential employees and said, we want to give you our company's biggest problems. These are the 10 largest problems facing our company today. Break up into teams, figure out the things that you would do to change them, and come back and pitch it to us like an innovation Olympics sort of thing. And we'll fund the best ideas, and you can help implement that. To me, that would be a company that was fostering internal innovation. Companies like WL Gore that are intentionally structuring themselves for innovation, knowing it's less effective in the short run, but in the long run, we'll out-innovate our competition. If you haven't learned about how WL Gore is organized internally, that is an entire class session in and of itself. It's a fascinating thing. I'm always skeptical when I see quotes that are just too good to be true. In this case, it would have been my great fortune had Darwin said this. I've looked it up. Darwin never said this. But I think it's probably something that he might have thought, or that summarizes, as I understand it, the theory of evolution. And I think it's true in the business sense, is it's no longer the biggest companies that survive. It's no longer the ones with the deepest pocketbooks. It's no longer a world in which the big eat the small, but it is rapidly becoming a world in which the fast out-innovate the slow. And so we need to learn as organizations to become more responsive to change, even if it means disappointing quarterly earnings, even if it means a suboptimal organizational structure, even if it means telling senior leaders that they've got to crack a book, learn about social media, learn about software development, et cetera. And it's not okay to continue doing the same things you always did in light of how the market is changing. So I'll leave you with a comic. I think it's true. The people who are best able to help their organizations do this have a very bright future ahead of them. And I hope that's all of you. So with that, that's how you can connect with me on LinkedIn. And I'm ready to take your questions.
Hi, Josh. Thank you again for your excellent talk. Thank you. So, do we have any questions from the audience?
I've got a bunch of them if nobody else is going to speak up.
Let's go for it.
Yes, go ahead, Morgan.
Okay, so what you were talking about, and the part that really has us very concerned, is the fact that the way that our society is structured, and I'm talking about in this country and other capitalistic countries, um, our healthcare is tied to our work, our retirement is tied to our work, our education is expensive. Our tax rates are, what's the right way of saying it? A joke. The people that they audit the most frequently are the people who are barely making it compared to billionaires and millionaires. And yet, this capitalistic spirit that we have is very innovative.
It is.
So we're dealing with a double-edged sword. On the other hand, we've lost our ethics and compassion. How would you resolve this?
Wow, that is a very, very big question. I don't think we have time for, but let me start with generalities, and it'll buy me time to think. I don't think there are any areas in the world in which we say something taken to an extreme is always better, right? We want to get somewhere fast, but driving faster up to a point, and after that, it gets you there a lot slower or not at all. And that's true, I think, in everything. Like the old truism is moderation in all things. And so I agree with you that capitalism is the best system we found for innovation so far, but unfettered capitalism may not be. And when we think about the value of the commons and the tragedy of the commons, and we think about what is best for sustainability and long-term thinking, for instance, unfettered capitalism would be that we allow any investor to sell anything to anyone. Doors closing. And unfortunately, that means that quite frequently you could have people taken advantage of, which means they don't put their money in a stock market. The stock market is still a wonderful thing. One of the people that Dr. Meng and I used to work with and teach with would talk about what the US innovation market has over China, and that's that in China, according to this one speaker's opinion, the ideas that got funded were the nephews and nieces of the party members, or the cousins who were connected to someone who could sway influence. Where in the US, we believe that ideas should compete in a meritocracy of ideas. And I don't think we necessarily have a perfect meritocracy. It's very, very, very flawed here. But when we allow the wealthy to purchase regulation and regulatory capture to the point where we can no longer trust the markets, now unfettered capitalism has destroyed the innovation value that it once had. So balance in all things. I personally, just like every time you see a warning label, we kind of have to laugh and say, I'll bet you it says that because somebody did that thing, right? Whenever I hear that we're going to slash regulation, I think each and every one of those regulations were probably a hard-won legislative victory to prevent another tragedy. There was a company that sold a thing that destroyed a family's lives, and it was such a tragedy that everyone agreed this should never happen again, and we passed a regulation. And when we allow corporations to come in and buy their way to a more lenient regulatory structure, what we are inviting is the next toxic train derailment, the next deep sea sloppy seal job that destroys companies up and down the Gulf. All of these things, like at what point are we going to say doctors and medical companies should have known that this town can't possibly be consuming this many opioids for a legitimate purpose? Unfettered, unregulated capitalism, I think, is to our long-term detriment. We need a healthy balance of responsible regulation and capitalism. And I think also there are lessons to be learned about making sure that companies can lay off employees and those employees still be okay, that people can switch careers, because what we want is a workforce that can align itself to the most value-added work and the best jobs possible. Well, if it threatens your children's healthcare and your retirement and your ability to pay your mortgage to make a job change, you're not going to do that. And then we can't be surprised when companies will not retool or change their business model because the effects are just too tragic for families. So I think there's a lot of change that needs to happen in this area, but it isn't happening.
Thank you. We have one question from the audience. Beth, do you have a question?
No, it was answered.
Was answered. Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So are there any questions? I have one question, Josh.
Sure.
So regarding the innovation, is there any way that we can, somehow instill, is there any way we can combine innovation mindset, somehow train them, if it is a very needed skill for the students in the technology education, in your opinion?
I took a stab at that once, Dr. Meng, and when I wrote curriculum and when I taught it at PLU in the graduate program there, what I was trying to get at was this idea of how can we see opportunities in a business model, design big data experiments that validate or disprove our theories. How can we then start to formulate ideas around a product? How can we do minimum viable product experiments, A/B style testing, and teach them a little bit about how to work with product management, project management, and software development teams. And the idea was to just give people kind of an overview of what that looked like so they'd be more conversant and able to participate in the process. I think I should just admit that I'm wildly out of my depth to talk about how to teach innovation. You have far more experience with that than I do. But I just find it such an interesting area. I think you and some of your former colleagues who used to be my teachers really lit a fire in me when I could see these problems around me in the companies I was working for. It was like every day encountering the subject material in real life. So it's an area that I remain fascinated with. One of the areas that I am super fascinated with is how do we proceed when everything is an unknown? If you think about like NASA putting astronauts on the moon, how big the rocket needed to be depended on how long the mission was going to take, depended on how many astronauts we were sending, depended on, I mean, there was just so many unknowns that it was this mutually reinforcing mess of unknowns. And in business and IT today, I see a similar problem, like mutually reinforced uncertainty or mutually dependent uncertainty of, you know, tell me what we're trying to do and I'll tell you what technologies we should use, but you can't tell me what we're going to do until I tell you what we are capable of. But that depends on what developers we hire, which is dependent on what problems we're trying to solve and technologies we're using. And which technologies we use is influenced by what technologies we already use and what we're capable of. And so you see some organizations that just churn and churn. They create a new innovation team. You know, they employ DevOps. It's the latest, 10 years ago, it was the latest thing. But there are all of these buzzwords and teams that in the end often produce very little because there's just too many unknowns. And so I'm really amazed with stories like NASA where they were able to figure that out one piece at a time. So I don't know that I have a good answer, I'm afraid.
I think that was a good answer. Thank you.
A non-answer.
Yeah, I know that we had a fabulous colleague. You mentioned that PLU, and I'm glad that you had that experience when you were an MBA student. Excellent. Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? In that case, Josh, I'd like to thank you again for this opportunity. And your talk has been always informative, entertaining, and also full of lesson. And thank you for the thinking point to bring back home.
Sure.
And I hope that I hope that we can invite you again in the future, and hopefully someday it can be on site so that there will be more interaction with the students in the physical space.
That would be. Thank you so much for having me. I'd enjoy an opportunity to come meet you all in person. Hope you have a great night.
Thank you. Good night. Bye.
Thank you.